Just a little side note for you all. I was not planning on doing a video this week, but it appears as though some of the students that I had assigned for this week to teach have dropped the class. So I am going to just do a quick explanation of the information in Chapter 4, a quick video for you. Also, how did I choose the people who would be speaking or teaching each week? Who would be doing the cultural interview videos? Who would be doing the teaching videos? Actually, I just used a random name picker, almost like drawing things out of a hat, but a little more sanitary. Anyway, I just thought I should let you all know that. Please, if you have any questions, let me know. As far as I know, this textbook, although it is set to be released in 2025, the version of the 6th edition should be very similar to this of the 7th edition. When you are doing your teaching video, just make sure that the title of the chapter aligns with the week that we are covering. If you haven't figured out where to find that information yet, it is under the Content tab on our Desire to Learn homepage. All right, let's go ahead and get into Chapter 4, Identity and Intercultural Communication. There are some topics that we cover in this class that are difficult to cover, and I will try my best to be as politically correct as possible in my examples and to try to teach you as much as I can so that you can learn about interacting in an intercultural workplace. So we are going to talk about understanding identity, social and cultural identities, identity development, and multicultural identity. Okay, so identities, what are they? They are created through communication. They are created in spurts. They are multiple in nature. No, this is not the same as multiple personalities. Multiple personality disorder is something that is covered in a completely different class. Identities are influenced by society. They are dynamic. In other words, they are ever changing. And they are developed in different ways in different cultures. So what does it mean? Identities are created through communication. How do we come to understand who we are? Does everyone see you as you see yourself? Identities emerge when messages are exchanged between persons, negotiated, co-created, reinforced, and challenged through communication. Different identities are emphasized depending on whom we are communicating with and what the conversation is. And how do mobile communication technologies influence relationships and our sense of identity? So all of these things could take a lot of unpacking. But when you are creating an identity through an exchange with someone else, it is the face that you are presenting to them at that time, in that place, in that discussion. Then how do communication technologies influence this? In a variety of ways. Of course, these are available to be discussed further in other communication classes, but just briefly to talk about how computer-mediated communication changes identities. You put forth one identity on social media, and you may put forth one identity on Facebook, one on Instagram, one on Snapchat, one on X or Twitter, even Whatnot, or sorry, WhatsApp. Whatnot is a selling app. But either way, on any of those platforms, on any of those social media, you might have a different identity. You also might have a different identity through text, or you might display a different identity to me when you are teaching or doing a cultural interview video. So identities are created in spurts. Why do we say that identities are not created in a smooth, orderly process? Well, because they're not. I didn't come into the world in one identity and just stay in that identity the whole of my now almost 47 years on the planet. What kinds of events provide insights into who you are? Well, identity is created in spurts. So I may have picked up a little bit here as a child. I might have picked up a little bit in high school. And in each of my different college experiences, I might have gathered more about who I am. In between, there may be long periods when we do not think much about ourselves or our identities or how we are developing them. An identity is really, how do we identify, right? Sometimes we may feel we know exactly who we are and our place in the world, and other times we might be rather confused. Identities are multiple. We belong to various groups. We develop multiple identities. We highlight our different identities at different times. So if you're going to church, temple, synagogue, mosque, however you say the religious place that you would go to, you put on a different religious identity when you go there, a different identity than you might have in the outside world. Then again, they might be the same. If you're going to clubs or bars, your sexual orientation identity might be something that is outwardly expressed when it might not otherwise need to be. And men or women in social groups. This is gender identity. So you might identify differently in different groups of people based upon your gender. For me, I identify in different ways in men's or women's social groups, depending on the activity, honestly. My ex-husband is very good at sewing. I cannot sew at all. And that it seems very odd because usually men do not sew and women do. So we have our gender identity developed through social groups. As you'll learn, there are far more than just those three identities. Identities are also influenced by society. How and why do people identify with particular groups and not others? What choices are available to you? Identities that others assign to us are socially and politically determined. We are all pigeonholed into identity categories or contexts even before we are born. We might try to assign other identities to ourselves. So in this pigeonholed identity categories, remember I said I haven't been the same identity since the day that I was born. However, there were certain categories that I was born into. I am German, Irish, and Swiss American. I have naturally curly hair, so I identify with other people who have naturally curly hair. I was born into a Catholic family, so I was raised in the Catholic religion. I was born in Minnesota, so I identify as a Minnesotan. All of those things came from when I was born. However, many other things have changed and adapted as my identities have been created. So that's what is meant by identities are dynamic. What political, social, and national forces influence how identities are expressed? What is the identity of a woman? Now, this next sentence I think is a little off. I would say today there are many different ideas about what being a woman means, from wife to mother to feminist to professional. I don't think you have to be a wife and a mother or a feminist and a professional. You can choose which of these categories you fall into as a woman. Men can also fit into some of these categories. They could be a husband, a father. They could be a feminist as well, and a professional. How has the emergence of the European Union affected national identities of Europeans? This is something I made a comment on one of your classmates' critique forums when I was looking at their cultural video. And I just mentioned that people from Europe are all different national identities, but sometimes they get thrown into the same category, especially after the European Union. But honestly, the people from each of the European countries eat different things, speak different languages. Their countries do not all look the same. They don't act the same. These are very different places, and I visited a few of them. Identities are developed in different ways in different cultures. So as we've mentioned before, Americans value individualism and encourage a strong sense of identity and to be independent and self-reliant. Many African, Asian, and Latino or Latina societies emphasize dependency and interdependency among family members. I often joke that maybe I should have been born in a different culture, uh, only because I have visited many places and enjoyed a variety of getting to know people in different ways. So, social and cultural identities, gender identity, sexual identity, age identity, racial and ethnic identity, physical ability identity, religious identity, class identity, national identity, regional identity, and personal identity. These all make up who we are at any given time and in any given place. It just depends on what is happening. So let's delve deeper into gender identity. We begin life with gendered identities. What it means to be a man or a woman in our society or other societies is heavily influenced by cultural notions. Gender is not the same as one's biological sex. Popular culture affects how people socialize with others. It contributes to gendered contexts. We negotiate how we communicate our gender identity to others. So, as I was reading about, people often say that there are only two genders. That is not accurate. Uh, Biologically speaking, there can be a multitude of genders. Just because you have X and Y chromosomes getting together doesn't mean that there's only two combinations that will come from that. There can be multiple combinations that come from that. If you're interested in that, go ahead and look it up under a biological study about gender. We also have the genderbread person. If you're interested, I believe we are on genderbread 4.0, but that might be something else that interests you in the understanding of gender and gender identity. Sexual identity. Sexual attraction is complex and makes sexual identities even less categorizable. Views on sexual identities differ in various historical contexts. Do not assume that your framework for sexual categories is universal. Do not assume that the ways that sexuality is handled in public is the same in your hometown. Sexual identities and sexuality are definitely handled different in some of the European countries that I have visited as compared to some of the African countries that I have visited. I actually wrote a list for you of the countries that I visited so I can share those with you after a little bit. But people in some of the countries that I have been to have no problem sharing their sexuality and their sexual identity with people by wearing no clothes. In my hometown, in Minnesota, that would never be done. People just don't do that. In Fort Morgan, Colorado, I have not seen people do that either. And so I believe it probably would be difficult to come to the United States, even just to visit, and be expected to wear a swimsuit when you were never taught to wear a swimsuit on a beach. It just wasn't something that you did. So, like I said, sexual identity is different, and we can't assume that it's handled in public the same way as it is in our hometown. Age identity. Certain ages have special significance in some cultures. For this, we can think about the US and their Sweet 16 celebrations. We can think about uh, Central America, South America, and Mexico, and the quinceañera, which is for women when they turn 15. There are other ages, specifically people in the United States go by 5 and 10-year increments as important age milestones. The notions of age and youth are based on cultural conventions, and our notions of age often change as we grow older. So, like I just mentioned, I am almost 47. I'll be 47 in July. I don't view myself as old. Why? Because my dad and my mom are 74, and my dad's mom is 94. So I feel like I still have a long way to go, barring any accidents or anything that affects my gene pool. But I definitely feel like I have like 30 years to go. So I don't feel like I'm old. However, some people like me don't their bodies don't function as well as mine. They may, I can't say they've probably been working longer than I have because I grew up on a dairy farm and I've been working my whole life. But some people have maybe had harder jobs than I have had. Uh, there's a lot of things for age identity. Also, I do have a good gene pool, so I do look a bit younger than some people my age. Racial and ethnic identity. The way people construct racial identities and think about race influences how they communicate with others. Ethnic identity, a sense of belonging to a particular group and knowing something about shared experience of the group. And who are hyphenated Americans? So I can speak to my ethnic identity, which I have a little bit here. But hyphenated Americans are people who maybe they say they are French American, maybe they say they're African American, maybe they're Canadian American, and they put a hyphen in between the first and the second identity. I joke that I am Swiss American, and that makes me very cheesy. Look it up. Swiss is a type of cheese, and so is American. Physical ability identity. Why is communication related to issues of identity difficult between non-disabled and disabled? Physical ability changes over a lifetime. People with disabilities see themselves as a cultural group. Their identity involves changing how they see themselves and how others see them. So I have over time had many friends with different physical abilities. I currently have a godson and his brother who have Duchenne muscular dystrophy. They are 19 and 20 years old, and they are in wheelchairs, power wheelchairs, all the time. I had another friend in college who was in a wheelchair, and he refused to use his power wheelchair. He had been injured in a rodeo accident, and he liked to go dancing and downhill skiing. He liked to participate in a lot of physical activities that maybe some people wouldn't think someone who is considered a quadriplegic would participate in. Those were his things. So you have to allow people with a physical ability identity to let you know what their identity is. How do they identify? Similar to all of these identities. A little bit more on the physical ability. So the stages of coming to grips with a new disability. Focus on rehabilitation and physical changes. Adjust to disability and its effects on relationships. Stigma incorporation, integration of being disabled into one's own definition of self. People with disabilities struggle to convey a positive identity and to communicate that their physical ability is only one of their many identities. So my friend who I just talked about that was in college with me, he actually rehabbed here in Colorado at a place called Craig Hospital, Craig. And if you want to look up Craig Hospital, it's an amazing place. They actually pushed the person to be the person that they were before the injury. So that's probably why my friend is back into rodeo and horseback riding, even though he can't move his legs and has limited mobility of his left hand. I also did my dissertation on a lady who has a physical ability identity, and hers is lupus. So if you're interested in looking that up as well, my name was Heidi Gugisberg Connors when I wrote my dissertation, and it is through Regent University if you'd like to look that up. Religious identity. How does religious identity differ from racial or ethnic identity? When someone says, I'm Jewish, does that mean he or she practices Judaism? That he or she views Jewish identity as an ethnic identity? Being Jewish is one of the most unique identities because Jewish not only indicates a religion, it also indicates a people of a specific country. And so when someone says that person has a Jewish last name, is it a statement that recognizes their religious identity or ethnic identity or cultural identity of some other sort? What are the criteria for being a member of a particular religion? And conflicts arise when religious beliefs of some are imposed on others who may not share those beliefs. We have seen that many times throughout the history of the world. Class identity. Class identity plays an important role in shaping our reactions to the interpretations of culture. Class identity influences our perceptions of and communication with others. The lack of understanding about class differences and the stereotypes perpetuated in the media often make meaningful communication among classes difficult. In the United States, they would like you to believe, or the mainstream culture would like you to believe, that we don't have classes. However, I have done research on the poverty class, the middle class, and the wealthy class. If you are interested in any more of this information about classes within the United States and class identity, you can certainly look into Dr. Ruby, R-U-B-Y, Payne's books, and I believe it's P-A-Y-N-E, and she talks about the different classes within the United States and how you have to learn about each class in order to move in between the classes. For an example, it would be really difficult for somebody from the poverty class to move into the wealthy class just because they're good at playing a sport and they become a professional athlete. But you can definitely take a look at that. National identity refers to one's legal status in relation to a nation. It may be complicated when a nation's status is unclear. People have various ways of thinking about nationality. So in the United States, we say the Pledge of Allegiance and we sing our national anthem. Those things don't always apply to people who have recently immigrated to our country, and they hold their national identity to the country that they came from. Also, like it says here, it may be complicated when a nation's status is unclear. So two of the countries that I visited are Israel and Palestine. And the Palestinians and some other countries around the world believe that Palestine is a country. And Israel sometimes does not see it as a country. They see it as a state within the state or a state within the country. So that is really hard when you feel like you are Palestinian, but you might also be Israeli. That is something that's difficult. And this not only happens there, it also happens in like the country of Kosovo. Some people see Kosovo as its own country, some see it as a part of another country. I believe it's also included in part of Serbia. And so there are a variety of these countries and nations where their status is unclear. That makes your national identity even more difficult. Another way to think about this might be Russia and Ukraine. Some people are Russian by ethnicity or Ukrainian by ethnicity, but based on the country that they live in currently, they have to adapt because those two countries are at war. Regional identity. What is the difference between national identity and regional identity? Regional identity in the US does occur. We have Southerners or Texas that is advertised as a whole other country. Some regional identities reflect cultural identities that affirm distinctive cuisines, dress, manners, and language. This actually happens also in many countries around the world. Obviously, in Mexico, I believe there are 32 states in Mexico, and so not all of those regions are the same. I also visited Argentina, where I went to 3 separate places, and obviously the people in Buenos Aires, yes, you might say it different than I do, in Buenos Aires are different from the people in the Patagonian region, are different from the people in Ushuaia, which is considered the end of the world. So this happens based on different regions. I think one of your classmates might interview me and they will talk about maybe my regional identity because I was raised in Minnesota, which is very different than being raised in Colorado. Hopefully you get to hear a little bit about that. We also have distinctive cuisines, dress, manners, and language, believe it or not. Personal identity, who we think we are and who others think we are. It's contextual, and external forces constrain and influence our self-perceptions. Our personal identity can come into conflict with other identities. We use various ways that identity is constructed to portray ourselves as we want others to see us. So, identity development. Now, this is where it comes into a little bit of a touchy subject here, so I'm going to do this as best I can. There is minority identity development, people who believe that they are part of minority groups. There's a majority identity development, and there's characteristics of whiteness. Excuse me. The stages of minority identity development. Stage 1, an unexamined identity, a lack of exploration. Conformity, a strong desire to assimilate into and internalize the values and norms of the dominant group. Resistance and separatism, a blanket endorsement of one's group and all the values and attitudes attributed to it. And then the person may reject the values and norms of the dominant group or the majority group. Finally is the integration stage. People have a strong sense of their own group identity and appreciation for other cultural groups. People realize that racism and oppression occur, but try to redirect their anger in more positive ways. So this is all how the United States is based. This is all that the United States is based on, is minorities and how they identify within our culture. I live and teach in the 2 most diverse cities per capita in the state of Colorado. So I see minority identity development on a daily basis. In Fort Morgan, we have about 24 different languages spoken in town every day. Do all of us understand the different languages? Not exactly, but the 2 most dominant are English and Spanish. I know parts of 7 languages, so I can get along okay, especially when I'm teaching the ELL or English Language Learner classes. But it does take a bit of compromise and adjustment when you're in a town that has only roughly 13,000 people and there are that many different languages to learn and to accept on a regular basis. So people have come to the United States and they can choose to acculturate, they can choose to keep their own identities. This is not the first time that this has happened. There are some people who are referred to as Germans from Russia because they lived in Russia as Germans. They never became Russians and they never culturally identified as Russian. This was back in the time of Catherine the Great, and then I believe also her grandson was the second wave of Germans who came to Russia. They did not stop speaking German. They kept all of their cultural identities associated with Germany. So this happens in multiple places in different ways in different times in history. The best I can say is that you might want to explore some of these things further because I don't feel that I have delved enough of my research in this area to really give you more than that as far as information for this is concerned. So the majority identity development has an unexamined identity, acceptance, resistance, and a stage 4, also just like the minority identity development. So in stage 1, there's an unexamined identity, similar to the minority identity development. People do not fear the other racial or ethnic groups or feel a sense of superiority. You see this a lot in children, right? They can't and don't care what color, what ethnicity, what religion other kids are. They just play together. And I like to feel like I have kept that throughout my entire lifetime. I have friends from all of the countries that I have visited, plus countries that I have not yet visited and would like to go to visit my friends. And so I feel like I'm that kind of person. Stage 2 is acceptance, represents the internalization of the basic racial inequities in the society. Yes. Resistance represents a major shift from blaming minorities for their conditions to blaming the social system as the source of the problems. Resistance may be passive. One may feel embarrassed or ashamed and distance oneself from the dominant group. And then stage 4 is redefinition and reintegration. People begin to refocus or redirect their energy toward redefining their identity, and they integrate their majority identity into all other facets of their identity. I think I'm just going to leave that one right there for you guys to think about. I don't want to say any more here. This one is a bit of a challenge for me, and I don't understand it as well as I probably should have. And so please go ahead and look up the whiteness studies. But what does it mean to be white in the United States? What are the characteristics of white identity? Whiteness may be defined as a set of linked dimensions, advantage of race privilege, standpoint from which white people view themselves, others, in society, and it is a set of cultural practices. I don't particularly identify as just a white person, although I'm sure people do see me that way. I identify in different ways. And so to me, explaining whiteness and whiteness studies is not something I would prefer to do here. But if you're interested, please look up more about it. There are people with multicultural identities. People are multicultural because they were born to parents from different racial, ethnic, religious, or national cultures. So my parents taught us when we were young to say that we were German, Irish, and Swiss because it's common in Minnesota for people to ask what you are. And this means you're supposed to provide your ethnic background. Honestly, it doesn't matter what color you are, what size, shape, anything like that. They want to know where did your family come from? What were your national identities? It doesn't matter that you are that your skin is black toned, or that you are white toned, or that you look like you're Asian. Uh, in fact, in Minnesota, I just looked at the fishing rules for 2025, and they are written in a multitude of languages, including English, Spanish, Hmong, Karen, and others. Somalian is another one. So it's an interesting place that I was raised in, thankfully. Of course, I was raised in outstate Minnesota, so some of my experiences are different from those in the city, and some of those who were raised in the city is different as well. However, I was raised by a dad that grew up in the country on a farm and a mom that was raised in the city. And so I also have a different multicultural identity. My mom was raised likely in the wealthy or middle class, and my dad was raised in the poverty class, bordering on middle class. But again, there are multicultural identities for me based on how I was raised. My son was adopted into a family. He is not much racially different from my own family of origin or his own family of origin. However, there are different cultures that have come together to make him who he is today. Also, multicultural identity. Their parents lived overseas and they grew up in cultures different from their own. They spent an extended time in another culture as an adult or married someone from another cultural background. Multiracial people. Biracial adolescents may identify with one group, both groups, or an entirely new group. Exposure to more than one culture's norms and values often causes difficulty for biracial children, as it does for bicultural children. There are some things that are an embarrassment to my mom that my dad's family does, and vice versa. And again, if you called us white and said, well, you're all from Europe, so you must all be the same, we're not. And I know things about city life that some of the kids that grew up in my small country town don't know anything about, and vice versa. These people may be rejected by both groups, multiracial people. Most biracial children want to embrace both groups. Most do not find it difficult to manage their competing ethnicities or races and do not feel marginalized. I agree with that. And what are the positive aspects of having a biracial background? Actually, there are probably many. You are probably far more well-rounded as a multiracial person. Then there's also global nomads. There's those that are known as the third culture kids, TCKs, that grow up in many different cultural contexts. Maybe their parents moved around as missionaries, international business employees, or military families. TCKs have both unique challenges and unique opportunities. Like biracial children, TCKs often develop resilience, tolerance, and worldliness that are characteristics essential for successful living in an increasingly diverse global and economic world. Identity and adaptation. Long-term romantic relationships with members of another ethnic or racial culture and children of foreign-born immigrants may also develop multicultural identities. The process of cultural adaptation includes a U-curve theory, which is 3 phases in adapting to a new cultural situation. The first phase is excitement and anticipation. The second phase, although it doesn't last super long, is culture shock. It's a relatively short-term feeling of disorientation, of discomfort due to the unfamiliarity of surroundings and the lack of familiar cues in the environment. Then the third phase is adaptation, in which individuals gradually accept the rules and customs of the new cultural context. This also tends to happen for students who study abroad. They are very excited and anticipate very positive things when they leave home, and then they have a bit of culture shock, and then they adapt to the new culture, only to do all of things again when they return to their home country. Living on the border. The multicultural identity is not defined by a sense of belonging, but by a new sense of self. Encapsulated identity, a person feels torn between different cultural identities, which often creates feelings of ambiguity. They try to assimilate, but they never really feel comfortable. You could have a constructive identity, a person who thrives on the margins of 2 cultures. You can have intercultural personhood, are people who live on cultural borders and undergo a gradual process of enculturation, evolution. Culture brokers who can help others see their, sorry, I don't know that word, see and show a way of being in the world. Might be see themselves. Anyway, so like I mentioned, culture brokers, people within the different classes, one person must learn how to be part of the next class group within the United States, or it's hard to understand it. People might have to teach other people different religions, or if you are marrying someone of a different religion, or if you are becoming friends with someone who is of a different cultural background, any of these things can help you to develop a multicultural identity. It's not necessarily a new sense of self per se, but it is a different way of thinking about your identity. Post-ethnicity reflects growing willingness and ability to cross cultures, evolution of a nation in which personal identity is shaped more by cultural preferences than by skin color or ethnic heritage. And then this book wants us to ask what might be some reasons that we are not living in a post-ethnic society. I'll leave that one up to you to answer. I think that in some ways the US is becoming more post-ethnic, but in some other ways it is becoming less post-ethnic, and much of that has been based upon the politics and political actions of our federal government over the last few years. I would say, yeah, the last at least couple of presidents. Building intercultural skills. That's what we're hopefully doing in this class, is to become more interculturally competent. So in Chapter 4, Identity and Intercultural Communication, become more conscious of your own identities and how they relate to your intercultural communication. Become more aware of how you assign identities to other people. Practice communicating with others in ways that affirm their identities, and talk about the identities with your friends. Okay, so I did say that I wrote down a list of the countries that I've been to just so I wouldn't forget any, and then I also made a quick note about the continents that I've been to. So I've been to 22 countries from my count, US, Canada, Mexico, and the Bahamas in North America, China in Asia, Tanzania, Kenya, and South Africa on the continent of Africa, England, the Netherlands, Germany, France, Switzerland, Italy, Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, and Israel and Palestine. And those countries consider themselves part of the Middle East or part of Europe, depending upon who you ask within the countries. Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile are the countries that I have visited in South America. The reason that I also include the continents is because I've been to Europe, North America, South America, Asia, Africa, and Antarctica. Antarctica is not a country, so I can't say that I have been to 23 countries. All right, it was great to see you again. Have a great rest of your exploration about culture and identity.